to a fireside reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 42, Part 3. Without interchanging a word, they went slowly out of the room together, Uriah looking after them. "Well, Master Copperfield," said Uriah, meekly turning to me, "the thing hasn't took quite a turn that might have been expected, for the old scholar, what an excellent man, is as blind as a brickbat. But this family's out of the cart, I think." I needed but the sound of his voice to be so madly enraged as I never was before and never have been since. "You villain!" said I. "What do you mean? By entrapping me into your schemes? How dare you appeal to me just now, you false rascal, as if I had been in discussion together?" As we stood front to front, I saw so plainly, in the stealthy exultation of his face, what I already so plainly knew. I mean that he forced his confidence upon me expressly to make me miserable, and had set a deliberate trap for me in this very matter, that I couldn't bear it. The whole of his lank cheek was invitingly before me, and I struck it with my open hand so that the force with my fingers tingled as if I had burnt them. He caught the hand in his, and we stood in that connection, looking at each other. We stood so a long time, long enough for me to see the white marks of my fingers die out of the deep red of his cheek and leave it a deeper red. "Copperfield," he said at length in a breathless voice, "have you taken leave of your senses?" "I have taken leave of you," said I, wresting my hand away. "You dog! I'll know no more of you." "Won't you?" said he, constrained by the pain of his cheek to put his hand there. "Perhaps you won't be able to help it. Isn't this ungrateful of you now?" "I have shown you often enough," said I, "that I despise you. I have shown you now more plainly that I do. Why should I dread your doing your worst to all about you? What else do you ever do?" He perfectly understood this allusion to the considerations that had hitherto restrained me in my communications with him. I rather think that neither the blow nor the allusion would have escaped me, but for the assurance I had had from Agnes that night. It is no matter. There was another long pause. His eyes, as he looked at me, seemed to take every shade of color that could make eyes ugly. "Copperfield," he said, removing his hand from his cheek, "you have always gone against me. I know you always used to be against me at Mr. Wickfield's." "You may think what you like," said I, still in a towering rage. "If it is not true, so much the worthier you." "And yet I have always liked you, Copperfield," he rejoined. I deigned to make him no reply, and taking up my hat was going out to bed when he came between me and the door. "Copperfield," he said, "there must be two parties to a quarrel. I won't be one." "You may go to the devil," said I. "Don't say that," he replied. "I know you'll be sorry afterwards. How can you make yourself so inferior to me as to show such a bad spirit? But I forgive you. You forgive me, I repeated disdainfully. I do. And you can't help yourself, replied Uriah, to think of your going and attacking me that have always been a friend to you. But there can't be a quarrel without two parties, and I won't be one. I will be a friend to you in spite of you. So, now you know what you've got to expect. The necessity of carrying on this dialogue, his part in which was very slow, mine very quick, in a low tone that the house might not be disturbed at an unseasonable hour, did not improve my temper, though my passion was cooling down. Merely telling him that I should expect from him what I always had expected and had never yet been disappointed in, I opened the door upon him as if he had been a great walnut put there to be cracked, and went out of the house. But he slept out of the house too at his mother's lodging, and before I had gone many 100 yards, came up with me. You know, Copperfield, he said in my ear. I did not turn my head. You're in quite a wrong position, which I felt to be true, and that made me chafe the more. You can't make this a brave thing, and you can't help being forgiven. I don't intend to mention it to Mother, nor to any living soul. I'm determined to forgive you. But I wonder that you should lift your hand against a person that you knew to be so humble. I felt only less mean than he. He knew me better than I knew myself. If he had retorted or openly exasperated me, it would have been a relief and a justification. But he had put me on a slow fire, on which I lay tormented half the night. In the morning, when I came out, the early church bell was ringing, and he was walking up and down with his mother. He addressed me as if nothing had happened, and I could do no less than reply. I had struck him hard enough to give him the toothache, I suppose. At all events, his face was tied up in a black silk handkerchief, which, with his hat perched on the top of it, was far from improving his appearance. I heard that he went to a dentist's in London on Monday morning and had a tooth out. I hope it was a double one. The doctor gave out that he was not quite well and remained alone for a considerable part of every day during the remainder of the visit. Agnes and her father had been gone a week before we resumed our usual work. On the day preceding its resumption, the doctor gave me, with his own hands, a folded note, not sealed. It was addressed to myself, and laid an injunction on me in a few affectionate words, never to refer to the subject of that evening. I had confided it to my aunt, but to no one else. It was not a subject I could discuss with Agnes, and Agnes certainly had not the least suspicion of what had passed. Neither, I felt convinced, had Mrs. Strong. Then, several weeks elapsed before I saw the least change in her. It came on slowly, like a cloud when there is no wind. At first she seemed to wonder at the gentle compassion with which the doctor spoke to her, and at his wish that she should have her mother with her to relieve the dull monotony of her life. Often, when we were at work and she was sitting by, I would see her pausing and looking at him with that memorable face. Afterwards, I sometimes observed her rise with her eyes full of tears and go out of the room. Gradually, an unhappy shadow fell upon her beauty and deepened every day. Mrs. Markleham was a regular inmate of the cottage then, but she talked and saw nothing. As this change stole on Annie, once like sunshine in the doctor's house, the doctor became older in appearance and more grave. But the sweetness of his temper, the placid kindness of his manner, and his benevolent solicitude for her, if they were capable of any increase, were increased. I saw him once, early on the morning of her birthday, when she came to sit in the window while we were at work, which she had always done, but now began to do with a timid and uncertain air that I thought very touching, take her forehead between his hands, kiss it, and go hurriedly away, too much moved to remain. I saw her stand where he had left her like a statue, and then bend down her head and clasp her hands and weep. I cannot say how sorrowfully. Sometimes after that I fancied that she tried to speak even to me in intervals when we were left alone, but she never uttered a word. The doctor always had some new project for her participating in amusements away from home with her mother, and Mrs. Markleham, who was very fond of amusements and very easily dissatisfied with anything else, entered into them with great goodwill and was loud in her commendations. But Annie, in a spiritless, unhappy way, only went whither she was led, and seemed to have no care for anything. I did not know what to think. Neither did my aunt, who must have walked at various times 100 miles in her uncertainty. What was strangest of all was that the only real relief which seemed to make its way into the secret region of this domestic unhappiness made its way there in the person of Mr. Dick. What his thoughts were on the subject, or what his observation was, I am as unable to explain as I dare say he would have been to assist me in the task. But as I have recorded in the narrative of my school days, his veneration for the doctor was unbounded, and there is a subtlety of perception in real attachment, even when it's borne towards man by one of the lower animals, which leaves the highest intellect behind. To this mind of the heart, if I may call it so, in Mr. Dick, some bright ray of truth shot straight. He had proudly resumed his privilege in many of his spare hours of walking up and down the garden with the doctor, as he had been accustomed to pace up and down the doctor's walk at Canterbury. But matters were no sooner in this state than he devoted all his spare time, and got up earlier to make it more, to these perambulations. If he had never been so happy as when the doctor read that marvelous performance, the dictionary, to him, he was now quite miserable unless the doctor pulled it out of his pocket and began. When the doctor and I were engaged, he now fell into the custom of walking up and down with Mrs. Strong, and helping her to trim her favorite flowers or weed the beds. I dare say he rarely spoke a dozen words in an hour, but his quiet interest and his wistful face found immediate response in both their breasts. Each knew that the other liked him and that he loved both, and he became what no one else could be, a link between them. When I think of him, with his impenetrably wise face, walking up and down with the doctor, delighted to be battered by the hard words in the dictionary. When I think of him carrying huge watering pots after Annie, kneeling down in very paws of gloves at patient microscopic work among the little leaves, expressing as no philosopher could have expressed in everything he did, a delicate desire to be her friend, showering sympathy, trustfulness, and affection out of every hole in the watering pot. When I think of him never wandering in that better mind of his to which unhappiness addressed itself, never bringing the unfortunate King Charles into the garden, never wavering in his grateful service, never diverted from his knowledge that there was something wrong, or from his wish to set it right. I really feel almost ashamed of having known that he was not quite in his wits, taking account of the utmost I have done with mine. Nobody but myself, Trot, knows what that man is, my aunt would proudly remark when we conversed about it. Dick will distinguish himself yet. I must refer to one other topic before I close this chapter. While the visit at the doctor's was still in progress, I observed that the postman brought 2 or 3 letters every morning for Uriah Heep, who remained at Highgate until the rest went back, it being a leisure time, and that these were always directed in a business-like manner by Mr. Micawber, who now assumed a round legal hand. I was glad to infer from these slight premises that Mr. Micawber was doing well, and consequently was much surprised to receive about this time the following letter from his amiable wife. Canterbury, Monday evening. You will doubtless be surprised, my dear Mr. Copperfield, to receive this communication, still more so by its contents, still more so by the stipulation of implicit confidence which I beg to impose. But my feelings as a wife and mother require relief, and as I do not wish to consult my family, already obnoxious to the feelings of Mr. Micawber, I know no one of whom I can better ask advice than my friend and former lodger. You may be aware, my dear Mr. Copperfield, that between myself and Mr. Micawber, whom I will never desert, there has always been preserved a spirit of mutual confidence. Mr. Micawber may have occasionally given a bill without consulting me, or he may have misled me as to the period when that obligation would become due. This has actually happened, but in general, Mr. Micawber has had no secrets from the bosom of his affection, I allude to his wife, and has invariably, on our retirement to rest, recalled the events of the day. You will picture to yourself, my dear Mr. Copperfield, what the poignancy of my feelings must be when I inform you that Mr. Micawber is entirely changed. He is reserved. He is secret. His life is a mystery to the partner of his joys and sorrows. I again allude to his wife. And if I should assure you that beyond knowing that it is passed from morning to night at the office, I know less of it than I do of the man in the south, connected with whose mouth The thoughtless children repeat an idle tale respecting cold plum porridge. I should adopt a popular fallacy to express an actual fact. But this is not all. Mr. Micawber is morose. He is severe. He is estranged from our eldest son and daughter. He has no pride in the twins. He looks with an eye of coldness even on the unoffending stranger who last became a member of our inner circle. The pecuniary means of meeting our expenses, keeping down to the utmost farthing, are obtained from him with great difficulty, and even under fearful threats that he will settle himself, the exact expression, and he inexorably refuses to give any explanation whatever of this distracting policy. This is hard to bear. This is heartbreaking. If you will advise me, knowing my feeble powers such as they are, how you think it will be best to exert them in a dilemma so unwonted, you will add another friendly obligation to the many you have already rendered me. With loves from the children, and a smile from the happily unconscious stranger, I remain, dear Mr. Copperfield, your afflicted Emma Micawber. I did not feel justified in giving a wife of Mrs. Micawber's experience any other recommendation than that she should try to reclaim Mr. Micawber by patience and kindness, as I knew she would in any case. But the letter set me thinking about him very much. Thanks for joining me. We will continue Chapter 43 tomorrow, same time and place, 5 Pacific, at Fireside Reading, live on Instagram. And all the chapters are uploaded daily to the YouTube channel, along with a synopsis, in case you don't have time. And the YouTube channel is called Fireside Reading. Please check it out and subscribe if you'd like, and comment and like. I always like receiving those and reading them. Until I see you all again tomorrow, but I won't be reading Sunday. So yes to tomorrow, Saturday, but not to Sunday. Until I see you all then, please stay very well. Good night.